Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the second half of version 2.6 Star Rail banners, featuring Acheron and Aventurine for this second half. So looking at both of these characters, let's go through both of these banners, including their light cones, and see whether or not these characters or their weapons are a good pulling option for you. And if you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in. We do also have a Discord that you can check with a link in the description, so do check that out if you are interested. Now, on to the video.
So looking at the first character, obviously we are looking at Acheron, and looking at her as a character, obviously she's going to be your main DPS, but even though she is a Nihility unit, she's still going to do most of her damage in an erudition type of way, so doing lots of damage across a bigger playing field by using her ultimate. Looking at her in a general sense of how her skills kind of work, usually you'll be using your skill to inflict basically these stacks of Crimson Knot that you're going to have. You can have up to 9 stacks, and as soon as you get to 9 stacks of Crimson Knot, you'll be able to trigger your ultimate. Your skill will be able to give yourself some of this as well, and that's going to be very useful for you. Now when using your ultimate, you're basically going to do 3 separate hits that are going to do some damage, and then you're going to have a final bigger hit that's going to hit at the end, and obviously those will scale with your level of your ultimate talent. Now, based on those Crimson Knot stacks that you have on an enemy, on a specific enemy, the more Crimson Knot stacks you have on the enemies that are still alive in there, the more damage Acheron will do as well. So that is something also to keep in mind when you're using her. She's not the only character that can give herself these Crimson Knot stacks though. In her talent, it states that you can once again have up to a maximum of 9, and then when any unit inflicts debuffs on an enemy target while using any of their abilities, whether that be basic attacks, skills, ultimates, follow-up attacks, anything like that, Acheron gains 1 point of Slash Dream and inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot on a target. Now remember, once again, you're taking those Crimson Knot stacks away by using up those Crimson Knot stacks to then immediately deal more damage in that ultimate. So that's kind of the idea with her as a character. So I will say all of this kind of with her as a character, that's kind of what you're focusing on. Once again, erudition type damage, but mainly focusing, even though she has a damage character, you want some other characters that can apply debuffs. And speaking of a character that can apply some debuffs, let's go ahead and look at Aventurine.
So taking a quick look at Aventurine, he is a preservation unit, so his main function is to be the sustain of your team and basically keep you alive for the endgame content that you'll be using him with. So jumping right into what he does, all of his damage that he does through his basics, skills, ultimate, it's all dealt through his defense. So building a lot of defense on Aventurine if you are looking for a little bit of damage is nice, and the reason you're going to be doing that anyways is because his shielding is based on his defense. So you can see that in the skill where he actually provides all allies with what is called a fortified wager shield, and it blocks damage equal to 24% at level 10 of Aventurine's defense plus 320, lasting for 3 turns. So you build a lot of defense on him, and that's how he shields your units from attacks. Now, one of the kind of takeaways from Aventurine is actually in his talent, where he has this thing where he can get up to 7 different stacks. And when he reaches 7 stacks, he'll perform a follow-up attack. Now, there's many different ways he actually gets all of these different stacks. There's so many, in fact, I might not just go over all of them, but just know that as you deal follow-up attacks, as he attacks, a lot of different things that are going on, he'll gain all of these points, deal a follow-up attack, which deals a lot of, can actually deal some good damage just because it is considered follow-up damage, but also he will give shielding to your other characters as well. One of the ways that Aventurine actually does get all of these different stacks, which are called blind bet, by the way, is by using his ultimate. He'll actually gain a random number between 1 and 7 of these points. So you could get 1, you could get 7, and it kind of makes accurate sense for Aventurine considering he's kind of a gambler kind of guy, right? So he'll gain a random number of those to build up towards that follow-up attack that we were talking about. Then he'll also inflict a status called Unnerved on a single target enemy for 3 turns, and also deal some imaginary damage, once again based on his defense. And when another ally in the team hits this opponent with that Unnerved status on them, the crit damage they deal will be increased by 15% at talent level 10.
Now looking a little bit further beyond the actual character banners, let's go ahead and talk about the 2 different light cones. Now, obviously, with these light cones, like normal, most of the time, these light cones are really only usable for the characters that they're kind of meant for. So when looking at these light cones, we're going to really see mainly how is the light cone really necessary for the specific character. Looking at Acheron's light cone, Basically, we see here in the superimposition at S1, it states that it increases the wearer's crit damage by 36%, which is even further considering she already goes into with her bonus abilities or her extra like trace, stats that she gets. She already goes into crit damage, so this goes into it even more. When the wearer hits an enemy target, it inflicts Mirage Fizzle on the enemy, lasting for 1 turn. Each time the wearer attacks, this effect can only be triggered 1 time on each of the targets. The wearer deals 24% increased damage to targets afflicted with Mirage Fizzle, and the damage dealt by the ultimate damage by this character is additionally increased by 24%. So as we can see, you're already getting a damage increase, you're getting crit damage increases, which she already goes into even more normally with her character, and obviously having other characters giving more crit damage. She's a very crit damage heavy character, so obviously focusing on some crit rate is probably going to be very necessary for her really, but also all the extra help into ultimate damage is very, very good. When you are consistently hitting a character, that just really depends on maybe some other characters that could use it, and with Acheron, you're always looking out to consistently be attacking the characters, because even still when you do a basic attack, you're going to be getting some extra help as well, so there's a lot of help in getting those stacks for your ultimate with the basics and the skills. And then also, that's kind of the idea. You're always trying to make sure you're constantly attacking. So when with looking at kind of Acheron for this, light cone, I would really say that overall, I don't really like too many other light cones really for her, especially because she is a Nihility character. A lot of the other Nihility light cones don't really focus too much into damage specific characters, and if there is a damage type character, it's usually like DOT or something like that. And that's not to say that Acheron can't do DOT damage. I'm pretty sure somebody has done it. But I think the major idea to look at here is that she is an erudition type character, so crit and ultimate damage packed into a Nihility kind of box. So when looking at these other Nihility light cones, it's very difficult to try to find one that's going to be very good for her. On the flip side, that also means that trying to find Nihility units that would actually want to use her light cone could also be a little bit of a difficulty. I don't know, Rift, what do you think about kind of maybe some other characters using her light cone and vice versa?
Well, honestly, I would agree with you for the most part. It's just that Acheron, even though she is Nihility, like you already said, a lot of other Nihility characters and even light cones don't really spec into just the way that Acheron works. She really is just kind of unique, and so having her light cone for her is just going to be pretty valuable. And like always, I mean, that's pretty much every Star Rail character kind of has their own unique way that they just work, and it makes sense because it's like a turn-based game. So I would agree for the most part on that, and it's true. Like all the other light cones, even 4-star options, tend to deal with DOT, and if they don't, they work, and I'm sure you can get away with, but Acheron's light cone has a lot of value for her. I mean, it's just so much damage. Even still looking at it, it's just crazy. But I think that's enough said for that, and it kind of gets the point across. Looking at Aventurine's light cone, which is called Inherently Unjust Destiny, and let's look at the superimposition on that, assuming it's just one copy, S1. It states that it will increase the wearer's defense by 40%, and when the wearer provides a shield to an ally, the wearer's crit damage increases by 40%, lasting for 2 turns. When the wearer's follow-up attack hits an enemy target, there is a 100% base chance to increase the damage taken by the attacked enemy target by 10%, lasting for 2 turns. Now, this sounds really good to me. Even at S1, you're getting a pretty big spike of defense just right there at the beginning, 40%, and then when Aventurine's going to deal his follow-up attack, assuming you have this on him, once again, give a little bit more damage to your other units by 10%, which also lasts for 2 turns. So the great thing about it, why I like it so much personally, is that Aventurine is a sustained unit. He's the unit that's in the team for the primary purpose of keeping the team alive to actually dish out damage and keep the fight going. So he needs to, first and foremost be doing that job. But in a high, just high investment team where like all of the characters are 5 stars, they all have their light cones, let's just say. Having this extra buffing capability attached to the light cone, especially in a sustained light cone, preservation or abundance, right? Having this extra damage to just throw on top of your other damage dealers, whoever you're using with Aventurine, is just really nice. Now, I also will say, is it completely necessary? I don't necessarily think so, because when you think about it, once again, the primary job of a sustain is going to be keeping the team alive. So does he actually need this light cone to do that job, right? And I don't think he really does. All it's giving is 40% defense. There are other light cones that can give you defense and can do some other things, perhaps, that he's just going to do his job. He has high scalings. He's honestly one of the best sustains in the game, so he doesn't actually need the light cone to do what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, I think overall with Aventurine, the light cone's not necessary. I do want to just point out something though. When looking at the light cone, keep in mind when it does state that when the wearer provides a shield to an ally, the wearer's crit damage increases by 40%, so it doesn't go to other characters, but that does mean that Aventurine gets a little bit of boost to crit damage. Now you might be saying, okay, I know he does damage, but he doesn't really go into crit, so what's the point? If you go back to one of his bonus abilities, based off of his defense, he increases his own crit rate. So by getting the light cone, you are helping yourself. Your bonus ability is already giving you crit rate. Your light cone will then give you crit damage, and that kind of artificially creates your own crit while just going full blown into defense and then having, you know, effect resistance as well, kind of being your main idea. That's another stat that you also want to keep in mind when you're building your Aventurine. So I just wanted to point that out as well. So the universal buff is going to the other allies, but the crit damage is specifically going just to Aventurine. Looking now at the next part of our kind of video, looking at the next part of the to pull and not to pull, is looking at the questions. Really, the first question being, like always, do you actually need the character? Is the character going to be valuable on your specific account? And I think that has a very big idea here, especially when we're looking at characters like these two, who are very big heavy hitters. A lot of people have been saying that Acheron has almost fallen off, depending on her, you know, to make her usable and useful now in the current meta, you know, you have to have the E2, never mind the light cone, you have to have an amazing team. And honestly, I do think the E2 is good, and we'll talk about that later about with Eidolons, why, you know, that E2 is really, really good. But we kind of have a similar idea with Acheron, the same reason we had in Genshin, another question of is she even good for that role as well. And just like with Raiden, the E0 Acheron does extremely good. And just like a C0 Raiden, going away from the hyper carry, you could switch to something very different and easy to a newer character that can help the character out. With Raiden, instead of doing a hyper carry team, to make her just stronger, you could throw her in an overload team and get more damage out of her. With Acheron, it seems like you can easily just grab a new character like Zhao Cho, being one of her literally best supports in the game, slap her in the team with another Nihility unit. One of the 4-stars I believe is going to be on the banner is Pela, who's also an extremely strong unit and is really used in most teams for Acheron. Having those two characters at E0 with the light cone, and then some sort of sustain, Fujuan, Aventurine, who's on the other side, makes Acheron extremely strong and can patch up most of the damage that you're going to be getting from, you know, that E2 and not having a character like that. So because Zhao Cho is helping her get her stacks back, he's doing his own personal damage as well as he is going to be increasing her ultimate damage as well. Looking a little bit beyond Acheron though, I do think that still Acheron's extremely valuable. If you need lightning on your account, might be looking forward to it. If you are going to be grabbing Sunday, might take another peek at Jing Yuan, by the way. If you are looking forward to grabbing Sunday and you need lightning on your account, just maybe wait on Acheron and go check out Jing Yuan if he has rerun soon. Might have some pretty good combos there with Sunday. But anyways, with Acheron, I do think that she's a good character. I think she's almost given some unjust unhype, basically, with her as a character right now. Looking at Aventurine on the other hand, Aventurine I think most people can agree is an extremely strong character no matter which way you really look about it. He has good damage, amazing shielding capabilities that's constantly allowing shielding to happen over and over again. Basically those follow-up attacks that he does is increasing the shield that you already have on the character, probably from your skill. So it's easier to keep him skill point efficient because you don't have to use your skill as often usually. Also, depending on how many characters that have his shield are hit, he gets those stacks of the bet, so it's even faster applied to get a lot of those stacks back for him, allowing the follow-up attack, allowing more shield. Like I said, he does good damage, especially paired with someone like Acheron. Could be a very good combo here, considering he can allow for a lot of those. We were talking about who he adds on unnerved effect onto an enemy. He can allow, though that's technically a debuff on an enemy, and what that does is that allows Acheron to get stacks for her ultimate. So two characters that work very well together here. I would just say obviously Aventurine's probably going to be the meta pull here, just because he works in Fei Xiao teams. He works in any situation that you want to protect your DPS. Now, if you have a destruction unit that wants to get hit, aka Blade, he's not going to work that well. Or if you want a healer for the team for characters like aka Jing Liu, who just slowly decrease your party's HP, you're going to want a healer in that team. So Aventurine's probably not going to be the best in those situations, but like Rift was talking about, the major way that Preservation goes about in protecting their characters, he excels at very well.
The next question we ask is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? And we kind of touched on that just a little bit, but going more into that, looking at Acheron specifically, she kind of ties down to, and I guess you would agree with me, Vixen, she kind of ties down to one team. If you're building an Acheron team, you're really focusing everything around her on her. It's all about Acheron because she's the main DPS. So usually an Acheron team always looks at least somewhat similar, and really just kind of substituted with different characters. Like if you're not using Jiao Cho, who's one of the best in slot, as you mentioned, Vixen, then you're probably just using a backup like in a 4-star, maybe Pela, who's really not that bad, to be honest. You can use Black Swan. You can even use a really lower end spectrum, but Sampo is a viable option just because he's applying debuffs. So there's a lot of different options, but the thing about all of those teams is that they kind of all do look the same, just a little bit. Now, the one area I think you could say gets maybe just a little different is if you do have Eidolons on your Acheron, then, or even if you don't, you could use a character like Sparkle, who may not apply debuffs, but just is applying so many buffs to Acheron herself that she just naturally becomes an okay option to use. Of course, a sustain is just kind of doing the job of a sustain. The reason Aventurine is typically the best for, I think, specifically Acheron is the fact that he has a debuff that he can apply with the ultimate. Fujuan is not a bad sustain. She just doesn't apply a debuff, so Acheron can like actually use that. Now, if you don't have Aventurine and you have Fujuan, that's totally fine, and I would still just use that, you know? Like, don't pull Aventurine just to replace Fujuan. Now, if Fujuan's your only sustain, I guess moving on to Aventurine now, if you only have one sustain, for your case, let's just say your account only has Fujuan, you kind of want another limited sustain, and Aventurine is probably one of the best, if not the best, options to go after. I know for me personally, I only had Fujuan for a very long time. And so my second half, or first half, whatever other team I was using for endgame content, I had one team using Fujuan, but the other team had to use Bailu or Japard, sometimes even both, because they can't do their job as well as a limited sustain can do. So having two limited sustains, no matter where you're at in the count, is going to be helpful just because of that alone. So if you only have one sustain, Aventurine's just automatically a good pickup. For me, I picked up Linksha when she was here. I was looking at Aventurine for a very, very long time and was really just wanting to go after him because I'm trying to go after the Fei Xiao team. But I kind of just settled for Linksha because I just figured to myself that Linksha, what I really need is just that second sustain, and I need it as fast as possible. She has some follow-ups in her kit, so I can still make that work with a Fei Xiao team. And that's just the decision I made for myself. The point is, I needed a second sustain. So if you're in that position, Aventurine's the obvious pull. Now, if you already have two, that doesn't mean I don't think you shouldn't pull Aventurine. He's still like one of the best in the games. If you're trying to hyper invest into a specific team like the Fei Xiao team, then Aventurine is the best option for the sustain lineup for that team. And for, once again, Acheron, Aventurine is the best sustain to use because of the debuff he can apply. So just kind of thinking about those different things, whatever your account may look like. If you're a veteran, pulling Aventurine to kind of upgrade a previous limited sustain for a current team. If you're free to play or just a newer player, I think, honestly, between the two, you should be looking at Aventurine. For when it comes to building teams, you just really want a limited sustain no matter what team you're doing.
Now looking at the next question that we have, which is, do you need the light cones? Now, we've already gone over this a lot, so I'm going to be very quick about this. Acheron, go for the light cone. If you can, it's going to be very, very good. Getting down to the point where you just use your last wish until her last day here trying to get her light cone, it's going to be worth it. Aventurine, on the other hand, like Rift was talking about, yes, it's nice to get the extra damage, personal damage, or other characters' damage. Yes, the defense increase is great, especially for the crit rate that you can get, allowing him to crit more often, getting more damage out. All of that is great. At the end of the day, though, what do you care about most? His main job, which is sustaining. So if you care mostly about him as a character, you should be caring mostly about his preservation, preserving your actual team. So his light cone isn't necessary, and you really shouldn't care too much about trying to get his light cone. If you can and you want to, go right ahead. I can say it is a very good light cone. But I definitely think if I had to choose between the two, Acheron's is definitely more useful. But the last bit and the last thing that we're going to be looking at is looking between E0, E1, and E2 for both characters. Looking at E0 from my personal opinion, from what I've seen from both characters, considering I have both characters with both light cones, at E0, are they worth? That's the question. Acheron is not a character that you have to have at E2. It's just not. Just like Raiden's not a character that you have to have at C0. Once again, there's a lot of kind of connection you can have with these two characters. In my personal opinion, wait for Jiao Cho. If you're having that much of a problem with your Acheron, make sure you have Aventurine as a sustain. And if you don't have Aventurine, try to pick him up. And if you have to skip Aventurine here to get Acheron, don't worry, just wait for Jiao Cho's rerun. Jiao Cho is going to be an extremely good support for her as a character. Even having just a healer in that team as well allows a lot to happen. Jiao Cho is going to make so many things happen for Acheron and make her do extremely well. So you can patch things over time as you slowly get to a better team. That's actually what I'm doing. Right now, I'm even running Acheron with 2 Nihility units and Aventurine. But at some point, I'm going to be taking out one of those Nihility units and putting in a different Nihility unit, which is Jiao Cho. So I'm just waiting for that. And I would heavily regard people to do so with their team as well. Looking at E0 Aventurine, I've had no complaints. I know he has some pretty good first 2 Eidolons, but E0, S1, I've had no complaints. I would rather, once again, go for the superimposition, the S1, go for his light cone, than rather going for the Eidolons like normal. But I've never had any issue with dying or any problems, just getting an okay set on him, getting a bunch of defense, a bunch of effect resistance. He gives effect resistance to his teammates, allows them to stay, not have to effects basically hit on them, which keeps them alive a little bit longer most of the time when that happens because of certain effects that bosses and whatnot can give. So all of that being said, I do think heavily that Aventurine, especially at E0, is an extremely strong character that you don't have to worry about Eidolons for.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. These characters, and I think especially Aventurine, I think between the two, just once again, who has higher value, it's just probably naturally Aventurine, just because every team needs a sustain no matter what. It doesn't matter if there's no synergy or there is synergy. You need a limited sustain to even stay alive. Because what's the point if you're dying? There's no point to what you're doing if you're dying. And with that said, I think, like you said, and I think you testify pretty well because you have both characters at E0, Aventurine does his job completely at E0. You don't need the E1. You don't need the E2. Are they nice? Are they helpful? Of course. And the same thing for Acheron. But once again, just not completely necessary. Of course, pull the light cones, and I probably would say this about any character, and I know you would agree with me, Fixin. You should always, if you're considering more investment than just pulling the character alone, look to the light cone first. It's usually, okay, that's the key word, it's just better. Some characters out there actually do like their first Eidolon more than having their light cone, let's just say. I'm not going to bother with pulling examples, but they are out there. But for most of the characters, it's actually just pull the light cone and then consider an Eidolon. And I think that's just going to be the case for these characters.
Looking at the Eidolons though specifically, Acheron's E1 states that when dealing damage to debuffed enemies, which she already put the debuff on them, especially the other Nihility units, so that's probably going to be always, it increases her crit rate by 18%. Like I stated before, her stats that she gets, crit damage. Her light cone, crit damage. Getting the crit rate here is a very nice buff to not have to worry about your certain crit ratio. Also helps just a lot, even if you have a good crit ratio, helps it even more. Might even allow you to go a little bit more to crit damage than you originally thought. The E2, kind of the stunner here, is the number of Nihility characters required by her trace, the Abyss, to achieve its highest possible effect is reduced by 1. The Abyss states that when there are 1 or 2 Nihility characters other than Acheron in the team, the damage dealt by Acheron's basic skill and ultimate increases by 115% with 1 other Nihility unit, and 160% of the original damage when you have 2 Nihility units. So that's kind of the idea, meaning it's reducing it by 1. So what that means is that initially, you're always going to have a 115% damage increase. Even if you have no other Nihility units, if she's the only Nihility unit, she's always going to have the 115% damage increase to her basic attack, skill, and ultimate damage. But if you have one more Nihility unit, and this is what most people are talking about, only having one more Nihility unit like Pela, Jiao Cho, then you only have to worry about one of those to have the 160% damage increase. So much bigger buff. I would say most of the time this is once again very good Eidolon. Is it necessary? No, but is it nice? Yes. The other part of this Eidolon also states though that when this unit's turn starts, you gain 1 point of Slash Dream and inflicts 1 stack of Crimson Knot on the enemy with the most Crimson Knot stacks. Once again, Crimson Knot stacks, keeping those on an enemy. In the ultimate, you take those off, you do more damage. Having your turn start with then giving yourself a point of another point to your ultimate is very, very nice, because when you do your skill, you get 2, and if you start your turn with 1, you're already at 3. Never mind, when you start battle, you start at like 4 or 5. So it's very easy with the E2 to get to your ultimate a lot quicker, as well as have less Nihility units of a kind of restraining her in her kind of team. So I do understand why the E2 is very strong. Is it necessary though? No. Looking at Aventurine, the first Eidolon states that it increases crit damage by 20% for all allied targets with Fortified Wager, with the skill basically on them. After using the ultimate, it provides all allies with a Fortified Wager shield, whose shield effect is equal to 100% of the one provided by this skill. So it's just the ultimate is going to provide a shield just as strong as the one in the skill, which normally the one that's provided in the follow-up attack is actually like less than the one that you get from the skill, and the skill one is extremely strong. The one in the follow-up attack is just like a smaller version of the skill. So to see that when you use an ultimate and you then give a shield, basically it'll provide characters with this shield, and the shield's going to be just as strong as the skill, which means that you might not have to actually use your skill even less than he already naturally does. So a very strong E1. The E2 states that when using the basic attack, it reduces the target's all-type resistance by 12% for 3 turns. Now, 3 turns is extremely strong. It does mean that also with the E1, he's using his skills less and only using his ultimate, which also means when it comes time for his turn to happen, you're already with the E1 going to be doing basic attacks. So the E2 allows you to just get something nice and basic out of your basic attack. So although it's small and it's just 1 sentence long, the all-type resistance is extremely strong, especially at 12%. Tack that on with other characters that can also give the resistance is just really, really strong as well. So between these two characters, are Eidolons necessary? No. In terms of Acheron, the E2 was stronger than the E1, and in terms of Aventurine, I like the E1 more than the E2. So if you are looking for that, Acheron E2, Aventurine E1. We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or Lightcones coming up on the next banner are for you. As always, if you have any suggestions, please go ahead and let us know down in the comments. And also make sure to like and subscribe to the video. Check out our Discord as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.